Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter. Once upon a time there were 4 rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dears," said Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields or down the lane, but do not go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put in a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I'm going out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the woods to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather some blackberries. But Peter, who was very, very naughty, ran straight to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First, he ate some lettuces, and then some French beans, and then he ate some radishes, and then, feeling sick, he went to look for some parsley. But round the end of the cucumber frame, whom shall he meet but Mr. McGregor? Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened, and he rushed all over the garden, but had forgotten his way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes amongst the cabbages, and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster, and he thought he might have got away with it if he hadn't unfortunately run into a gooseberry net and got caught by the large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, and it was quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears. But his crying was overheard by some friendly sparrows, who flew in great excitement, said to exert himself. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, and he intended to pop it on the top of Peter, but Peter managed to wriggle out just in time, leaving his jacket behind, and rushed to the tool shed and jumped into the can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it hadn't had so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed. Perhaps he was hidden underneath a flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each. Peter sneezed. Mr. McGregor was after him and tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out of the window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to his work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling. He had no idea where to go. Also, he was very damp from sitting in the can. After a time, he began to hop, lippity-lip, lippity-lip, lippity-lip. Not very fast, and looking all around. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and it was no room for a little fat rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over a stone doorstep, and she was carrying peas and beans to her family in the woods. Peter asked the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she couldn't answer. She shook her head and gestured. Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his watering cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish, and she sat very, very still. But now the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He'd heard about cats from his cousin Benjamin Bunny. He went back to the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scratch, 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 scratch. Peter scurried underneath the bushes. But presently, as nothing had happened, he came out and he climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing his onions. His back was turned to Peter, and beyond him he could see the gate. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could, straight behind some blackcurrant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter didn't care. He slipped under the gate and was safe at last in the woods outside of the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Peter didn't stop running or looking behind him until he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired he flopped down on the nice soft sand of the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mum was busy cooking, and she wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. I'm sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mum put him to bed and made some chamomile tea, and she gave a dose of it